Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another video on the channel where today we've got another very good formation review of the 4-3-2-1. So if you do want to see more formation reviews and if you do have any other ideas and things that you do want to see as vids, make sure you do drop it in the comment section. Make sure you do drop a thumbs up on the video if you did enjoy and hit that subscribe button as well if you are new to the channel. We're going into this 4-3-2-1. This is a formation that is quite popular in FIFA, has been for quite a while, and we did do a little review on it pre-patch, so I want to try it out again post-patch and see if it's a good formation, just see if it's maybe a good formation to try out this weekend league and see if it can work out for me. So the 4-3-2-1 is never a formation that I've personally been a massive fan of. It's a formation that I've used in the past, but it's never been for me like a go-to formation. I don't know, it's just not a formation I've ever really got on with. How I found with it pre-patch, I found that it was a good formation. I didn't feel like it was an outstanding formation, so I'm going to try it out pre-patch and see how it goes. So going into it is a back four with a flat midfield and then kind of three strikers. We've got a left forward, a right forward and a central striker. So we've got three really narrow tight strikers, like an inside left and an inside right. So it's going to mean that defenses, especially defenses that maybe a typical back four, it's going to be a little bit tricky for them to defend, because we're going to have three, as you can see, you know, especially with the personnel we've got Mane, Mbappe and Garrincha. We've got some really top strikers there that are going to be making some ferocious runs in behind, you know, a lot of pace. So it's going to be quite tricky for a typical standard back four to defend, because now we've got three players running in between two centre backs being narrow. However, the negative, of course, is now that we don't have the width of a traditional winger. Moving on into that midfield, I never like seeing flat midfields personally in FIFA. I always feel like in FIFA you need to have a CDM and a cam. I never like to see flat midfields. I never feel like they're very effective, because the negative to obviously not having a CDM is if your opposition has a central striker, a central cam, my mistake, if he has a central cam, you don't have a CDM man marking him, so it can become a little bit, that guy can become very isolated and it can become very easy for him to pull the strings in that midfield spot. And likewise, if your opponent has a CDM and you don't have a central cam, it's going to make it quite easy for his CDM to play passes out from his defence. He can receive the ball from his centre-backs and he's going to have not too much pressure on the ball, because you don't have a cam that's going to be man marking him, as I said. So sometimes playing without a cam and a CDM can be a little bit tricky, but obviously playing with that flat three in midfield, majority of the time it means you can dominate possession in the midfield. It just means that sometimes it's going to be, for example, going forwards, it's going to be a little bit difficult to link up the play to your strikers, because you don't have that cam, and likewise because you don't have a CDM linking up your centre backs, kind of that bridge in between. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky getting the ball off your centre backs because you don't have that CDM to bridge the gap. So moving on into the instructions that we decided to use for this team, we've got the fullbacks I decided to keep on balanced. You can see that, as I said, we have those narrow tight strikers up front. I call them strikers because they play so narrow, they don't really play like wingers. So width in this team is kind of at a premium, so it depends on how you want to play with your fullbacks. I've experimented with playing them on balance. I've experienced with them on stay back while attacking, and I found that balance attack was the best way to go. I think you do need that width going forwards, and we're going to go into our tactics and discuss how we play with the tactics. But I think you do need the fullbacks to get forward and give you a little bit of width, because of the way we have these tactics and instructions set up. Your strikers do stay quite narrow, which I quite like, because I'd rather than make runs in between the centre backs, because it's going to be more dangerous than making runs out wide. So we're going to keep the fullbacks on balanced. I found that it was pretty effective, and obviously we're going to keep them on overlaps. I want them to be overlapping the wingers to give us that width. If they're inverted, they're going to run on the inside, and then that kind of defeats the object of them going forwards. I'm going to skip forwards to the front line, because the midfield I think is the most interesting part, and the thing that I think really makes or breaks this formation. I think you have to get that midfield right, and that's down to the way you set it up, but I think as well down to the personnel you have. The wide strikers, I decided to keep them pretty much as balanced as possible. I just wanted them on getting behind, as I've discussed before. They play quite narrow, and I want them to obviously make those darting runs in behind, especially because of the personnel we've got. They're all pretty fast, so we want them to make that darting run in behind. The thing that's most interesting about this is the support runs. How do you want to use the support runs? You could use them on drift wide. The negative to doing this is obviously now your formation's kind of like a 4-3-3 flat. If you imagine that Mane and Garrincha now playing both on drift wide, it's now a 4-3-3 flat formation. and that kind of defeats the purpose of the fullbacks going forward. If you want to play with them on drift wide, they're going to play like wingers, Now I would tell yourself, if you're going to do that, you now can tell your fullbacks to stay back while attacking and be a little bit more compact in defence. But obviously it means that you're going to have a little bit more width obviously in your attack, so it's going to be a little bit more tricky to get the ball to your striker, but you're now going to be able to stretch the game a little bit more if you have them on drift wide. And the other one that I contemplated, I tried, was stay central, trying to keep them, you know, as I said, we want to keep them central because we want them to making those runs in behind in between the centre backs. But I found that stay central wasn't super effective. I found like everything became too narrow, and whilst it is quite a narrow formation, you still need to have a little bit of width just to change it up when you're attacking. You don't want your players to be stood on top of each other. And I found with this formation, especially when you played on stay central, that the two wingers were literally so close to Mbappe at striker, and it just didn't work. It felt too narrow, everything felt too compact, and the players just didn't react well to it. So I decided to keep them on balanced width, which is why in the end I decided to let the fullbacks stay on balanced and get forward a little bit, because I think that's the best way to play this formation. I don't think you really want to change too much with the formation and the way they play. It is quite a narrow formation, so you just kind of need to run with it. So we decided to just keep them on the balance. Same with Mane, and then at Mbappe, stay central because we want him to stay central because he's the striker. We don't want him to drift left or drift right and get in Mane or Garrincha's way, get in the left or right forwards way. So we want to keep him on stay central, and obviously want to keep him on getting behind. So now moving on into the midfield. Now this is where it is a little bit interesting, because this midfield I like and dislike at the same time, because what I found with this formation was it was good, especially with the midfield. It's how you set the midfield up is really interesting, because you have that flat midfield, you don't have that cam or CDM as explained. It's really this central midfielder that's the most interesting position, and the one you have to get right, because you can tell him, as I've decided to, which was the way I eventually went, and I told him to stay back while attacking, everything else on balance, and obviously cover centre. Cover centre for all the midfielders is the way you want to play. But I told him to stay back. Now what's interesting is you can tell him to stay back. I found that I needed that link between my centre backs and my central midfielder, so I told him to stay back while attacking, so he could take the ball from my centre backs, and then he could play it into my centre mids, and then they could take it forwards to my attackers. You could also play with him on get forward, and he will then play up like a cam now. So now you're going to have your front three, you're going to have your cam, and then you're going to have your two central midfielders. So you could play like that. I personally feel like if you're going to do that, you absolutely then need to tell your fullbacks to stay back while attacking. But I found that was a little bit too aggressive, a little bit too attacking. And I found it in the sense that when I played a formation that was 4-2-3-1, the narrow 4-2-3-1, that was where it really came unstuck. Because if you can imagine when you're looking at this chart, or this formation, my mistake, the three cams, where they're going to be, you're going to have the left cam, which is going to be in between Mendy and Militao, just a little bit forwards, as you can see marked on the screen, where the central cam is and where the right cam is, and they're all behind your midfield. They're all behind, they're in behind. So if the guy gets beyond your midfield, you're going to really struggle, because not having that CDM is now going to make it really difficult. It means you're going to have to defend a lot one-on-one with your centre-backs, which is something you never want to do until you absolutely have to. So I found that the most effective way, because I felt like this formation was quite attacking, so I didn't need him to get forward, so I decided to keep him on stay back while attacking. You could also have him on stay back while attacking the central one, and you could have your two outside ones on get forwards if you like, to go that little bit more aggressive. If you're going to do that, you need to tell your fullbacks to stay back while attacking, because then you've now got the two outside midfielders and your three attackers, and now you've got your back four and your CDM, so you've got like a 5-5 split. So in the end, I found the most effective way was to have the outside mids on balanced and the central mid on stay back while attacking. That was the most effective I found. Now, of course, these are the tactics that I ended up sticking to, and the reason why was because, especially starting with defensive style, I decided to keep that on balanced. I'm not a fan of using press anymore. I don't find it's ever super effective. I feel like all it does is successfully gash your team out. I never find that playing even pressure on heavy touch, pressure on possession loss, constant pressure, I never find that they're that effective anymore. They don't seem to be super effective like they used to. That they seem to have been nerfed a little bit. I feel like all they do is successfully drain your team's stamina, which is not something you want, especially if you're playing something like Foot Champs. You don't want your team to be gassed late on, because if a guy's bringing on some really pacey strikers, you've got no way to counter it. So I decided to keep it on balance. Quick little tip for you: if you do want to play on a press but not on your defensive style, when you get in game, one thing that I always like to do personally, is if you want to play on a press, you can use the D-pad tactic, team press, and you can use that in bursts. So what I tend to do is start a game, feel the opponent out, see what they're like. If I get to about 20 minutes and I feel like I need a change, just D-pad tactic, go on team press and do that maybe till half time rather than changing your defensive style, because if you try and play on a press for the whole game, it's going to completely gas your team out. If you play in bursts on team press on that D-pad tactic, you're still going to get the benefit of playing on a press, and obviously the negatives that come with that are obviously it's going to leave some gaps in your team, but you're going to press and do it in bursts. So don't do it for the whole game, do it for 15 minutes, do it for 20 minutes, and then turn the tactic off and then maybe try it again second half. That's a good way that I would say if you want to still use a press but not use it for a whole game. Width wise, I decided to go on 4. This is already a fairly narrow formation, so I think you want to stick to the guns of the formation. I don't think you want to go like super wide on the formation. The team is built to be a narrow formation, so I think we're going to honour that and stay in that narrow formation. So I found that staying on 4 width was the best way forward. Depth wise, 6 is the number that I like to play on every formation, because I always find that when I go on something like 4, like I experimented going on 4 depth this weekend league with a different formation, and I just did not get on with it at all. I found like I was really defensive, and I struggled to really create like a bucket load of chances like I normally do. So I decided to go back to my usual, go on 6 depth, and this I found was a lot more effective. Especially you can play on 6 depth if your defenders are quick. You know, you can see we've got Mendy, we've got Militao, we've got Longley, we've got Semedo. They've all got shadows on them, so they've all got kind of like 90 pace plus. So playing on a high depth is not the end of the world because we've got really quick defenders. Offensive style, I think long ball was the way I stuck to it, because obviously I've got those quick strikers. I want them to make those runs in behind. I really want to drive the point home of making those runs in behind. So long ball was the most effective tactic that was used for this formation and for the style of player. It comes down to as well, you have to suit the strengths of your players that you've got in your team, and the strengths of my team is obviously I've got some pace and I've got a lot of creativity, so long ball was the most effective. Now the most interesting one was the width on attack, because I've said in previous videos you want to keep the width on your defense and offense the same, but I think defensively I would rather give up the wings when I'm defending and be more compact in the middle of the pitch, because most people do play with wingers, but I'm normally, for me personally, this is kind of like a personal thing, I'm normally very good at defending in the middle of the pitch, and I would rather give up the width because I'm quite a good 1v1 defender, so I'd rather give people the width and let them try and beat me one-on-one than leave gaps in the middle of the pitch open, because most people tend to score their goals through the middle of the pitch anyway. But offensively, you do need that option of playing a little bit wider when you're attacking, so we do want to have a little bit of width when we're going forward, so I decided to keep it on 6. Players on the box standard at 5. I just want to honour my instructions, which I've got pretty much all on balanced anyway, so I may as well keep the players in the box on 5. And then corners, that's up to you really. That's more down to how you play, and do you have any specific corner routines or free kick routines that you run. For me, I don't like to have too many players in the box for corners because I don't cross the ball. I typically go short, and free kicks the same. I typically will take a shot, or maybe I'll lay one off, so I don't need too many players in the box for free kick. But that was it for these tactics and instructions for this 4-3-2-1. I actually found that this was a good formation. I personally found that this is more effective actually post-patch. I wasn't a big fan of it pre-patch. Post-patch, I actually think this is definitely one of the better formations that you can use in FIFA, so I'd absolutely recommend going and using it. At the very least, go and try it out with these tactics, and if you don't like it, then you can switch back to your formation that's working for you. If you've got a formation that you're happy with and is working, stick to that, but I found that this was a good formation, and this is definitely a formation I'm going to experiment with the rest of the week in Rivals, and I'm going to experiment with it in Foot Champs next week. But that is it for the video, guys. So if you did enjoy, make sure you drop a thumbs up, make sure you follow me on Twitter for some more updates, and if you do have any questions about teams, about tactics or anything like that, best thing to do is to follow me on Twitter, and I'll respond to your questions. If you've got anything to ask, then I'll respond to it on there. Make sure you subscribe on as well if you're new to the channel. That's all for today, guys. Have an awesome day. I'm out.